And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Damn it, I fucked it up. Not the monastery, to GeekWatch, a subsidiary of the monastery, the open bar of the internet. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have two of my good brothers here in the temple. The man who may be I would say is the last remaining Oilers fan, but not those Oilers. Oh, good brother Nephenor.
Less than that core.
And the man of 1,000 runes, the CEO of Zadare Enterprises, and the bane of my fucking existence, good brother Xanatrix.
I didn't even have to bane him yet today. He already baned himself. I feel kind of accomplished.
Yeah. That and I think there was a bit of throw off on my part because of some really questionable arguments that I had to hear today. Especially regarding slander in regard to my beloved monks. Because look, I know some people are going to be worried about whether or not they should be able to play them. Look, contrary to popular belief, European monks were not just passive scroll writers. They knew how to fight as well as anyone else, because a monastery in the middle of nowhere could be a prime target for mercenaries.
Or, as some games have pointed out, very good target for Vikings.
That too. Point is, it'd be an easy sacking. And then again, the people who deal with that kind of thinking are the same people who are aghast at the idea that monks could drink.
Yeah, monks were not, in most cases, monks were not nearly as ascetic in the West as people think they are depicted of. There are certain monk orders that were, but not entirely all monks all the time.
Where do you think most of the wine came from?
Actually, let me talk about a monk most people should be very familiar with from a very famous medieval tale, Friar Tuck.
There you go.
The man was a booze hound and a lecher.
And those were his good qualities.
Yeah, and there's just the fact that it's a lot of people have this idea of the archetype and then just spread it out to other things. But we are getting off the rails, because this week I can actually now that I think about it, it's not that much off the rails, because, well, in a big part of the soundtrack with the subject matter is Gregorian monks chanting. So it's not. I am technically correct.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, this week we are talking about Halo. We kind of did way back when we did the episode regarding the rise, fall, and resurrection of shooters. But I wanted to spend some time focusing on Halo in particular. I know that a lot of old school fans have a hate boner towards it, although how much of that is legit and how much of that is people being hipsters, I will leave that up to you. But what is very interesting to me is the people who have dismissed the franchise without realizing how much of what came before actually plays into Halo's DNA. Um, and even and of course, the reason why the episode is titled "The Two Directions of Halo" is to kind of examine the Bungie era, as well as why the 343 era hasn't been able to quite stick it until Infinite for a hot minute. But I will freely admit I got in late. My entry point was Reach because I didn't have an original Xbox until quite some time later, and I spent more time for the longest time. I spent a lot of time with Forge more than I did in matches and messing about in Forge, which is not too surprising because before that I was infamous for some of the really evil maps that I would make for Advance Wars within my friend group. So the patterns were there.
Yeah.
But after I finally did get one, I didn't feel like jumping about with some of the ports, which is a shame because I kind of wish that I hadn't jumped on that custom edition as late as I did, because there have been some impressive mods when it comes to custom edition.
Mhm.
Chiefly among them SPV3. But I suppose Glassed as well, but I've only seen footage of Glassed. I haven't played Glassed. But the whole thing started of course with the original, which this is where we get into the title "Running a Marathon" because, well, what Halo was supposed to be took many forms before they finally settled on an FPS. One of the earliest forms was it was supposed to be a follow-up to Marathon, which might work if you were trying to do a direct sequel to, say, Marathon 2, but not Marathon Infinity, because what's there to follow up on when the ending has the end of the universe?
Well, I mean, they did it in Hitchhikers.
That doesn't count, and you know it.
That was it. Yeah. Hitchhikers Marathon I don't think was a comedy or enough of a comedy.
No,
That's true.
no. If anything, Marathon leaned far into hard SF.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why I loved it.
There's a lot of different reasons that I enjoyed it. I'm not gonna say that it going into hard SF is one of the big reasons for it. I'd say having an unorthodox form of storytelling for the time certainly helped. Uh, what did what certainly did not help was some of the level designs. I already ranted about it before we went live, but um, there was a special place in hell for whoever thought ship for sale cheap was a good idea.
And I'm just a fan of the fact that it brought new things to the table for first-person shooters, especially having to save people rather than just shooting them.
Mm-hmm. Though
and then SOS and escort missions became the bane of our time.
Mm-hmm.
And worrying about those damn simulacrums that could blow up in your face.
Yeah, although there is one game that is unofficially part of Marathon that I don't think gets enough discussion. Pathways into Darkness.
That is so damn old. I remember that one.
That's a deep cut there.
Mm-hmm. I've got a bone to pick with you. Although, and even eventually, the idea of it being a sequel got scrapped. It's not known why. Then there was the idea of doing something RTS-ish, kind of like their previous series Myth, which is an interest which even among RTSs is an interesting beast in and of itself. Even if there was that infamous bricking glitch with Myth 2. It's been patched down, obviously, but that's kind of a black mark to have on your studio.
Mm-hmm.
Um, then there was thought about doing a third-person shooter until they finally settled on doing an FPS. And I think Staten or one of the other guys had called the development of Halo the land of compromises. Actually, it wasn't the land of compromise. It was the wording used was assembling a cathedral in a hurricane. Of course, right in the middle of all this was them jumping ship from Apple over to Microsoft. And
Don't even get me started on that one.
Apple being so butt mad, they basically killed any desire to really do gaming on their platforms for years.
That and Microsoft butt fucking one of the other things that Bungie was working on, Ani.
Yeah, I'd imagine. Well, that was technically developed by Oni was developed by a different branch of Bungie.
Yeah, Bungie West. But you could tell at the point, what point in the game Microsoft took over because it had a nice fluid storyline, and then at that point, it just suddenly got stupid.
Mm-hmm. And truth be told, as bad as this is gonna say, I think Oni is going to go down as the best Ghost in the Shell like video game that we've gotten.
True. For all its fault, it is still the best.
Mm-hmm.
Because Standalone Complex was a anime game in the mid 2000s. You get what you pay for. First Assault Recon was barely a Ghost in the Shell game as it was. It felt like Black Ops 2 with a little bit of a skin change. And the Ghost in the Shell game on the PS1, well, that was made by the same team that did Jumping Flash. Don't get me wrong, I like Jumping Flash, as weird as it is, but the fact that you're spending the entire game in a Tachikoma does not exactly endear me. At least not
as adorable as they are.
As adorable as they are, it's one of those things that I can't. I'd need in order to really be a proper Ghost in the Shell game. I'd need a bit more than that. But when it comes to the first Halo, I think the big reason that everybody ended up copying it was because of it having a viable way to do FPS on console. Which I realize that sounds ridiculous, but consider the state of FPS on console before that.
Most of the FPS on console before Halo would have been like the earlier Unreals.
Yeah,
and Quake.
Unreal, Quake, Half-Life.
Yeah,
great games on PC, but the problem is the precision that they demanded is one that you couldn't do on console.
Yeah, aim assist wasn't a thing yet.
Aim assist wasn't a thing. Bullet magnetism wasn't a thing. and also you had very precise weapons with small targets and a fast movement speed.
Which work great on mouse and keyboard, but suck with a controller.
I remember the console port of Half-Life had a lock-on button. I don't think there's a more damning statement than that.
Is what it is.
And I know some people might say, well, didn't Metroid Prime have a lock-on button? I think the reason Metroid Prime was able to get away with that was because of the fact that it wasn't doing twin stick control and
Yeah.
was working around the particulars of the GameCube controller.
Even though the C stick could easily have been used as a twin stick. And I think later in the GameCube's life was used as a twin stick.
Mm-hmm. But they wanted to do a first-person adventure instead of a first-person shooter. Plus, Retro Studios was not exactly well organized. But I'm getting off the rails.
Mm.
So getting back on it, th even though with Halo you see the popularization of some things that would get annoying when other shooters would take it. I think it's a case of much like with Half-Life, people taking the wrong lessons. Um, like when it comes to regenerating shields, well, with the original you had the whole health and shield dynamic, which, truth be told, I actually prefer
Mhm.
over just health and regenerating shields, unless you have a game where the intensity of firefights necessitates it. Like that's the reason why I don't mind regenerating health in, say, early Call of Duty.
Mhm.
Because of how chaotic firefights get in that game, you kind of need it. Health packs would kind of screw things. But the the other thing that I know some people are annoyed with, but I can understand why it's a thing, is the whole two weapon setup.
Mhm.
As I understand it, the initial idea was each weapon had very distinct strengths and weaknesses, and you were basically stating what your playstyle was going to be with them. That said, the original Halo does have a bad habit of telegraphing what's coming with weapons.
Mhm.
Like if you're walking around and you see a rocket launcher, you're probably gonna see vehicles in the next few minutes. If you see overshields, you're probably gonna see hunters in the next room.
Oh, hunters.
Oh, and in that sa- in the same vein with that, oh, I'd say I know that everybody's made jokes about the pistol.
Mhm.
Uh, because, well, in multiplayer, 3 shots from the pistol and you're dead. But it isn't as easy as people think it is, because you do have to lead your shots.
And you have to make sure that they're headshots.
Mm-hmm. But there is one thing that was in the that when it came to the original Halo, I will not defend. I will not defend the library.
That's okay. The devs don't even defend the library.
Yeah, although it's kind of funny that looking at, say, the original Destiny, how much Bungie didn't learn, because so
Mhm.
many firefights in Destiny are you holding off enemies while you're your companion is working on something. That's the entirety of the library. Holding off waves of flood or other enemies while Guilty Spark starts fucking around.
Ah, yes, Guilty Spark.
But
What a cunt.
yeah, and truth be told, when everybody has talked about how masterful of a story the original Combat Evolved was, but you know how I've talked about how some TTRPGs put a whole lot more effort into their setting than their mechanics.
Hmm.
In the same vein, I think when it comes to Combat Evolved, the if you took away the scoring, the story might not have as much impact.
Yeah, the music really did have a very big effect.
Hmm. Even though the editing of the music with Combat Evolved was kind of iffy.
Hey, when it comes to music, Salvatore and O'Donnell, those guys were masters of their craft. All of their games they touched were gold.
That's not what I was getting at, Neff. It's more of how it was edited in game.
Yeah, it fit everything.
Mm,
Well, it fit what it was there for.
yeah. I think the better word to describe what I'm getting at is how it's timed, especially during certain gameplay moments.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Um, and apparently the original idea they some people have tried to claim that they had always planned for a trilogy. That wasn't the case. They put out the first game and it was left open-ended just in case they wanted to follow up because they didn't know if Halo would be successful, and for that matter, they didn't know if the Xbox was going to be successful. So when it was, they ended up having to scramble, which is saying quite a bit because there was as much as I enjoyed the multiplayer, I think the big reason why big team battle became far more of a staple than some of the other arenas, some of the proper arenas, is because of that 10-second rule and how it was ridiculously easy to spawn camp.
Hmm.
But when it came to 2, look, everybody more or less knows the absolute hell that development was because they had spent that amount of time on a brand new engine that they claimed was in-game footage and ended up kind of painting themselves into a corner with,
Hmm.
which which is why there's so much cut content when it comes to 2, because midway through they had to just blow the whole thing up and start from scratch. And I think that's the I remember at the time a lot of people being confused about the presence of the Arbiter.
Hmm.
And I'd like to think that a lot of it is due to the fact that, well, a lot of the stuff that was supposed to make him a parallel to the Chief got cut.
He still felt like a good character regardless of that, though.
Yeah, and of course I'm never gonna say no to Keith David.
Except when he's not breathing at the end of the movie. Then you have to say no, because that's not Keith David anymore.
Damn it.
That is a good point.
For those of you who don't get that joke, go watch John Carpenter's The Thing.
Such a classic.
It's also kind of amusing that South Park parodied that with the cripple fight.
Cripple fat!
But I do, one thing that I do remember, when it can a big deal being made of is the whole dual wielding thing. But if I'm being honest, outside of SMGs, how many good combinations of dual wielding were there when it came to Halo 2?
Needlers.
Okay, that one I'm
He
willing to go
makes a
with.
very good point.
No, no, no. I don't just make a good point. I make a great point because if you ever dual needlered on multiplayer, everyone called you a cunt and a cheater. You fucking chick! Don't do dual needlers. Fuck you. I'm gonna win. This isn't team deathmatch. This is King of the Hill. I'm a win.
Mhm. Oh, I but I think you see my point. A lot of the dual wield combinations, I can't help but wonder if dual wielding was something that was either done late in development or they just didn't have enough time to do what they wanted to with it.
I'm beginning to think it might have been kind of an afterthought. They're just like, hey, wait a minute, maybe we should add this in.
And
While I think it was an afterthought, but it wasn't as limited as you're making it out to be. To be honest, a lot of good combinations were a plasma pistol with basically anything else because the plasma pistol could strip the shields of elites.
mhm. Yeah, I don't mean to slag the concept. It's just that I'm not entirely sure if it was fully taken advantage of.
Oh no, it definitely wasn't. And in Halo 3, uh, when they tweaked it a little, it's clearly put more thought into it, but it still didn't exploit everything it could have.
Well, two was trying to go for a faster and more aggressive playstyle,
Yeah.
which is the reason why I don't mind the fact that it did the regenerating shields thing exclusively and dropped health. With one asterisk I will put on this, and that is unless you're playing on legendary.
Halo 2 or Halo 3?
You know exactly why I'm bringing that up.
I do. I just didn't find it as hard as Legendary on Halo 3. But
Legend
Halo 2's Legendary was more bullshit than Halo 3's.
3's legendary was fine. 2's was bullshit because for several reasons. One, obviously enemies have more health, but they also shoot faster than you, and you don't and you take more damage.
Mm,
In fact, in some cases and of course there's the fact that there's more enemies. And how could I forget the jackal snipers?
yeah, that's the primary source of bullshit.
Yeah, the other forms of bullshit I'd say are on the same level as Plutonia levels of bullshit.
Yep.
Although, truth be told, between the two, I'd rather play Plutonia.
I can understand that.
But the Jackal snipers, where it's a one hit kill and you can barely see them. Yeah, that's where you're pushing things. But
Mm-hmm.
there were a few more stages that they had planned on doing, and there was actually plans on making High Charity into a full on level instead of a cutscene. In fact, a lot of the reasons more cutscenes were used, aside from just wanting to do a more expansive story, was to get around the stuff that they couldn't do.
Exactly.
Although this does bring the question of is it possible to do a good boss fight in an FPS?
I'd argue that there are. Um, and we've seen them in older and newer FPSs. So
Yeah,
it just depends on how it's implemented.
I will. I will say that Tartarus is an example of how not to implement it.
Hmm.
And well, if they had actually made it a boss fight, I'm pretty sure the Scarab I'd put there as well. But Bungie themselves outright buried the Scarab in that behind the scenes documentary.
Yep.
Uh, mostly because they felt it was way too scripted, and I think one of the art directors had said the design looked like a handbasket. But the but when it came to the jump between two and three, um, obviously everybody wanted to figure out what the hell the follow up was going to be after the whole finishing this fight line at the end of two.
Hmm.
But a bi- a big thing when it came to three was Bungie not wanting to repeat the same mistakes that they had made when it came to development, which is why they ended up expanding the team that they had, which makes a lot of sense because part of the reason part of the reason that the PS3 and 360 generation was the seventh generation was a very mixed bag was with the jump to HD, a lot of assets from previous generations could not be reused.
Hmm.
And a lot of people had to change their approach very quickly, and not everybody was able to keep up. Then the financial bubble that happened in the mid 2000s came around, which did not help at all. And because of that, a lot of studios, especially in Japan, suffered, and that's something that we covered when we ripped into the whole thing with Dev.
Yeah.
But I remember, but when it came to three, uh, narratively, I'd say three was an upgrade. Although the idea with with those flashing segments where Cortana would be speaking to you, I'm not sure they had the impact that they were intended to have.
Okay.
Uh, I think it's one of those things that might be able to work once or twice, but they kind of overdid it.
Mm.
And I remember in the behind the scenes there was talk about how you need to remind people of what they're missing, which I think speaks to an issue. I think speaks to a bigger issue of if you keep if you have to keep reminding people, it can start to go into annoyance.
Yeah.
But I will admit that when it came to the brute weapons, um, a lot of them to me didn't have as much of an impact as I would have liked. I'd like the design of the brute weapons, and that's something I've enjoyed with them since. But but aside from the gravity hammer, I'm trying to think if there's any that didn't feel like lesser versions of what came before.
Mm, I'm not sure. Gave you more chances to restock with things, though, that which was good, or to swap up more often in battle.
Hmm. Well, there certainly is that. But I think things like the spiker um was the spiker was all right. The brute shot, I barely even used that.
Hmm.
Oh, and the mauler, it just felt like another kind of pistol.
Okay.
Like I guess you could say it's supposed to be a short range shotgun pistol hybrid, but it didn't feel like that.
I'll be honest, I didn't use it very much either.
Hmm.
I tended to stick to human or the elite weapons.
Oh.
Anything that wasn't brute, basically.
Hmm. But there were but the other the other thing that is the other thing that I think is kind of amusing is you know how we hated jackal snipers. That I think somebody paid attention, because then 3 comes along and gives them very visible and identifiable headgear,
Yep.
as if to say we're sorry that we're sorry that jackals were such a nuisance beforehand.
Hmm.
And of course, although I will state that I know some people might give me hell for this, but the Flood aren't that fun to fight. Like, as long as you've got as long as you've got a shot, and I think the big reason that they're not that fun to fight is a lack of variety when it comes to forms. You either have
Hmm.
combat forms or you have infected forms, which lore wise it's certainly accurate, but I'd say the key thing to a proper firefight in an FPS is having a variety of enemy types that you have to figure out ways to prioritize using your kit.
Hmm.
And I guess the best way to the best way to approach it is think of them as chess pieces. You have obviously your cannon fodder, and then you've got your bigger threats.
Hmm.
And them being able to use the same weapon kit certainly helps the variety, which is is technically there with combat forms, but they're so slow when it comes to firing that it doesn't feel like it.
Hmm.
But at least with 3, I didn't have to deal with them trying to spam the SMG in front of me, because I'm gonna be honest. If between a Magnum and an SMG, I will always take a Magnum.
The Magnum's generally more useful.
Hmm.
Insert dirty Harry quote here.
Yeah, yeah, I suppose. But hey, if the boot fits, and of course, worst case scenario, you could always break out the 7 wood.
What?
Is but three introduced something that has been tooled around with for years with mixed results, and that's an idea of adding a 4th element to the golden triangle. the golden triangle has always been the fact that you're able to always just with a button press go with guns, grenades, or melee, which was a step up when some games in the past had melee as a weapon slot that you had to cycle into. But but in three's case, that's where we had equipment, and aside from the bubble shield, I can't think of any equipment that was all that useful.
Hmm. Armor lock was good for certain AI manipulation.
I,
But that was really it. It was more of an exploit than anything.
it's an exploit, yeah, yeah, and radar jammer. Most people weren't going to be using radar that much to warrant it. The only exception was the bubble shield.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, of course, although when it came to reach, it would get the this would get it would actually get worse because once again, I know I'm stepping on toes, but armor abilities, I honestly think that they were a bit too far the other way.
Mm-hmm.
I know that includes sprint, and I know that can seem ridiculous that running is an issue, but when you're introducing two movement speeds into maps, that can create problems. The big, especially when it comes, especially since one little change can balloon into a bunch of other things.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of which, when it comes to reach, I do think reach is a good example of some of the best and worst habits of the Bungie era. But before that, I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about ODST.
Ah, yes, ODST, the version of the game that had no shields.
No shields, had a stamina thing instead. Um, apparent There's debate about whether or not it was intended to be a standalone or intended to be a expansion. Um, around this time, Bungie wanted out of Microsoft, and Microsoft agreed on the condition that that they give the rights over to the franchise to them, and make two more games.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess somebody looked at what at the time was Recon and said, "This is the campaign is as long as as long as its competitors, namely Modern Warfare. So why not release this as a standalone?" I would say that when it comes to ODST, if it had actually been given time to be the standalone that it claimed to be, it probably would have been better off, because it tries to it tries to act like you can do any of the segments in the hub world in any order,
Mm-hmm.
but that's kind of like saying you can do any mission in a UB box game in any order. You can, but it's very clear there's a specific order the story has in mind.
Yes.
And trying to do it otherwise is kind of like watching episodes of a TV series out of order.
Hmm. Sequence breaking is always fun, though.
Uh, and admittedly, I don't mind I don't mind the silenced SMG here because it's intended to reinforce the fact that you're an ODST, you're not a Spartan.
Hmm.
But I do feel that a little bit too much of the gameplay feels a little bit too much like you're still a Spartan, just a slower one.
A slower one.
You're a marathon level era Spartan.
I guess. Now, and yeah, there's the counter argument that you're not going to be able to do as much damage unless you're headshotting with the silenced SMG. But since a lot of the people who are going to be playing ODST were Halo 3 veterans, that's not as much of a downgrade as I think they were thinking. Because well, depending on your playstyle, you'd already gotten a handle on headshotting as it is.
Hmm.
But the bigger contribution, of course, was Firefight. And yeah, it's not the first. I mean, everybody and their mother had some sort of horde mode around this time. But I think what I think what allowed the firefight to work was the fact that you were dealing with vulnerability. I think that's also the reason why firefight in say Reach just wasn't as interesting to me.
Yeah.
Oh, mostly because well, it's the idea of firefight or a horde mode. I think only really works when you are not um when you are low powered, when you're not a high powered machine.
Yeah. Okay.
Uh, somebody had asked me once if wave defense was handled in say Space Marine, would you have the same problem? Yeah, because that game is already built for you being outnumbered and giving you tools to deal with it. So what would making a horde defense mode change? It can work in something like Gears or something like Call of Duty because you can't take that many hits.
Hmm.
Whereas Halo, you're gonna be taking a lot more hits.
Absolutely. That's entirely what the regenerating shields were for,
Hmm.
to account for how much more, uh, well, just how much more there was.
Yeah,
There are always a lot of enemies.
and adding more enemies was adding and just more period was apparently the mindset when it came to the development of Reach, because you have more enemies, except in doing so the AI ends up suffering. You have more weapons, most of which didn't stick around, and the whole concept of noble team being this larger cast,
Hmm.
which apparently originally they wanted to go with 7 characters. That might have been a bit much, which I think is the reason why it got reduced. And admittedly, I do consider Reach to of the original Bungie era. I consider Reach to have the best outright story,
Hmm.
even if it's a story where everything goes worse. also the closest time that Halo's actually felt grimdark, because there's always been this motif of the human covenant war with humans on a losing side, but in the actual campaigns, that doesn't quite transfer. In Reach, it certainly did, but the only other place where it really felt that level of desperate was oddly the supplementary material, namely the books and several of the stories within the Halo Legends anime project. Some a few of them being significantly better than others, although some of them are just a classic case of somebody wanting to fuck around.
And as we all know, when you fuck around, you find out. Sometimes finding out can be good. That doesn't always mean bad things.
Mm-hmm.
I remember downloading some of the weirdest fucking stuff for Halo.
Oh yeah, because Forge was a brilliant thing to do with Marathon Infinity and a brilliant thing to do with Halo 3 and Reach.
Exactly.
But admittedly, bringing all that up was just to help set up, because once we venture over into the 343 era, this is where things get interesting. Now, first thing is that 343 was assembled essentially as a dream team of developers from all over the industry. You had some people from Pandemic, you had some people from Rockstar, you had some people from Retro Studios, from both of the SOCOM teams, and I think some people from Guerrilla as well. The point is, a bunch of people who had built their name in other studios, and then being told, okay, you guys have to make a sequel to Halo 3. Which may not have been the smartest move in hindsight. It probably would have been better to put them on some sort of side project so that they could get familiar with each other first, instead of doing a direct sequel to the biggest game on the 360.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing that I don't 4 is an extremely mixed bag, because there's things that I really like with 4, and there's things that I really hate. When it comes to the likable things, a lot of it deals with the relationship between Chief and Cortana, especially since they decided to venture away from Chief being a audience surrogate / semi-silent protagonist into being his own character.
Which, frankly, I actually think was not a good move for Chief.
Why?
So, I know that we've talked about silent protagonist stuff before, and that there's a point where someone should not be a silent protagonist. I never felt like Chief stepped over that. He was definitely supposed to be. I mean, even his armor is the Mjolnir armor is reminiscent of the Doom guy. He was meant to be that, just someone you step into and be badass as. Moving him over to becoming his own character, at least with the initial 343 ventures, kind of felt like you undercut him.
Yeah, I actually agree with you on that. Giving him that spotlight there actually did him more harm than good.
It's primarily the implementation, sure, but easing him into a more character instead of audience surrogate role was something that they did far too abruptly. They didn't actually ease in, and it really fails the power fantasy that a lot of people like to play as Master Chief for. Like, yeah, everybody knows that technically Chief's call sign or whatever is John 117, but the no one called him that. It was always, you're playing Master Chief. Even the very old meme, my name is Halo. I'm here to kill aliens and doesn't afraid of anything. It's very clear that this is something the player puts on to play the game, rather than a character that they are watching. It is a surrogate that they are being. And that's actually a lot of FPS games. Like, not all of them, but a lot of FPS games do that because you're being a badass. You want to be a badass.
Mm-hmm. Which is somewhat understandable. Uh, I can see it. I can see it from both angles. On one hand, through things like the novels, Chief was depicted as his own character. So it's tempting to want to bring that full circle. On the other hand, there has been through several games there's been this legend built up of John 117 to the point that to the Covenant he may as well be the Doomslayer. I mean, they referred to him as the demon.
Yeah, and that's still, like, let's put it this way. It is only with the very recent Doom games, 2016 and Eternal, that the Doomslayer, Doom Guy, has started to become more of a character than an audience surrogate. But it's been subtle.
Yeah,
and
they don't. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it's that subtlety that's necessary for the transition. Going too hard too fast is going to alienate too many people.
It's a bit of a whiplash.
Yeah. So there is a way they could have started implementing more character into Chief. They just needed to do it the right way.
I think actually you were with the mention of books. That could be part of the problem. Is that some of the people were thinking, "Oh, well, they're doing this in the books, so we can just do this in the game too," not realizing that a lot of the people who played the game, or a lot of the ones who played the games, don't always read the books, so they're not going to pick up on these things.
And what was it that we always say about extracurricular material, Monk?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the big thing there is that we outright say that if you have to pick up material outside of the main media, in the event that the media is not already designed that way, because there are media that are designed to be intertwined, such as the Dot Hack games with their multimedia projects intertwining, and anything Yoko Taro touches. They are always designed with external media intertwining in mind. But in the case of the Halo games, that wasn't a thing until later on. And so if you have to read the novels to understand why Chief suddenly is no longer an audience surrogate, that's bad. You've done something wrong. You need to make sure that the transition is understood inside that primary medium.
Yeah, and even with that, I'd say if they needed somebody to be the character when it came to when it came to Halo 4, you kind of already have that in Lasky. I know some people really don't like him, but he can easily fill in the role of the conscience.
Mhm.
Uh, especially since his whole motif is doing the right thing, even if it's against orders.
Yep.
Admittedly, there's a few lines on the Infinity that are a bit cringeworthy, but the fo- apparently if the GDC presentation was any indication, it took them quite a while to actually nail down a direction to go in. And one of the big examples of this not being able to have a unified voice issue was the design of the Promethean enemies. They initially planned on 6 right out of the gate. Bungie didn't try for 6 until Halo 2. And apparently the big one that that they spent a lot of time trying to figure out was the Promethean Knight. The story as it went was they would come up with one design which they liked but didn't fit within the fiction. They'd come up with another design that they liked but didn't support the gameplay that they wanted to do. And there was another, and then they would come up with something that did one of the other two, but wasn't a design that they liked. And it was stated that they rebuilt the Promethean Knight from the ground up 3 times, and that they were happy with the final result, but the path getting there was a royal pain.
I can understand why.
And I think the fact that they focus so much on that is part of the reason why the other Promethean enemies don't feel as interesting.
Because they just chose them and moved on so they could get the night done.
Either that or they realize the mistake too late, because there are 3 Promethean type enemies that are in it: the Knight, the Crawlers, and the Watchers. And the problem is when you compare is that each of them cuts off one part of the golden triangle. With the Watchers, they're support, and I think they're intended to be something similar to engineers from ODST, especially since they can provide Knights shields. But since they're flying and they can't take advantage of the weapon system, the only real way to deal with them is shooting them. Crawlers,
Yeah.
I think are meant to be grunts, but they don't have the variety that grunts have. I mean, yeah, grunts are cannon fodder, but you can't overlook them.
Yeah, they also had several variations. You know, grunts with plasma pistols, grunts who would try and chuck as many grenades as possible, grunts with a plasma rifle that were too cowardly for their own good. There's a lot of stuff grunts did.
Grunts getting on turrets
Yep.
could make your life interesting. And when 3 came along, we had suicide grunts.
Yep. Yep.
Like even though they're cannon fodder that there's a variety of ways that they can be used in a firefight. Whereas crawlers, they're certainly mobile, but that's about it.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to the knights, I think the intent was for them to be the equivalent of elites. And they do have the weapon variety, but the problem is they are always armed with a blade that does a lot of damage up close.
Mm-hmm.
And I know some people might equate that to the energy sword. The energy sword was just one way that a elite could be equipped. It wasn't a case of energy sword and a rocket launcher or something like that.
Yeah, not to mention that again, we're talking about loadout variety,
Mm-hmm.
which Promethean enemies didn't have a lot of.
No, they didn't. And again, whatever variety they did have, you're likely just going to try and use guns and grenades with them and stay out of close range.
Yeah.
There's also the fact that the teleport and then wait 5 seconds doesn't have the kind of oomph that that is intended. Like I do remember when somebody asked at a convention about the idea of dual wielding energy swords, and the response was, "Are you fucking crazy?" Of course, then Legends comes out, and we have dual wielding plasma swords in the duel. So I don't fucking know. But the that but even when it comes to the weapons, there's a weird thing going on, because if you look at the UNSC and Covenant weapons, you can have the format of one is hit scan, the other's projectiles. Yes, there's exceptions on both sides, but that's the general direction. Whereas the direction when it came to Promethean weapons is all over the place.
Hmm.
I mean, some of them are projectile, some of them are hit scan, some of the, and a lot of them just feel like weaker versions of what came before. Like I'll use the bolt shot as one example. Like that thing feels like a just a slightly different, just a slight variant on the plasma pistol.
Hmm.
And that's the vibe that I had gotten with them.
Yeah, I get it.
And the the other thing is maybe because of the fact that Halo 4 was right in between console generations, in between the 360 and the Xbone, but it was the shortest campaign and the most linear. There was also the fact that it pulled some blatant Deus Ex Machinas, especially the whole thing with the librarian.
Hmm.
So I think a lot of that is a case of, yeah, they had this dream team was brought in, they were given a blank check and not given a whole lot of direction, and when it came to them finding a direction, they had spent way too much time arguing about what to do. Well, arguing is a little bit of a stretch. The Basically there wasn't a unified voice until a little bit later on, mostly because they weren't given a direction to go in.
Hmm.
Like, you know how we've talked about about the concept of a series Bible when it comes to television?
Yep.
Oh, I think the same thing can apply when it comes to game development, especially if you're following up on a game in a long running series.
Yeah.
But just grabbing a bunch of talented people, giving them a blank check and saying figure it out is a case of not understanding how game development actually works. and then somebody from Microsoft's division would go in and not know how the tabletop RPG ecosystem works. So I guess there's precedent.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people had called Halo 4's multiplayer Call of Halo because of the loadout system.
I remember that.
Truth be told, don't get me wrong. I'm not a fan of the loadout system, especially given how it affected the way maps worked. But there is one thing that was a much bigger problem that I don't think got enough hate, or rather, it certainly got hate, but it's not what people focused on with some of the complaints, and that was ordnance.
Ah, you mean like the big guns?
The intent of ordnance, from what I was able to see, was wanting to give new players an opportunity to use power weapons. And there were two forms of ordnance. So there was the personal ordnance that you'd get from scores, and was basically score streaks in all but name. And I
Mm-hmm.
didn't mind that. You do well, you can get a power weapon to drop. Fine. World Ordnance I have a problem with because it would drop random weapons every 30 seconds. In a game where map control and map understanding is crucial.
Yeah.
So because of that, you could end up with cases of people getting power weapons way too quickly and essentially turn the whole game into a coin toss. Plus, it's not going to feel all that nice when the world ordinance you get is just a pistol and somebody else gets a binary rifle.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think the only time I'm willing to put up with that kind of thing is if you do it in, say, I was going to say big team battle, but there wasn't much of that in Halo 4. Because at least with big team battle, it's not meant to be all that serious. It's meant to be the mode for people to fuck around in.
Yeah.
But of course, then there was the issue of armor mods. But if I'm being honest, armor mods went back to the same tier that equipment did in Halo 3.
Mm-hmm.
Like it doesn't have that much impact, and I don't miss it. Uh, I will note when it comes to 5 though. 5 is a masterclass on how not to write a story.
I wonder why that is.
Rule of thumb: do not pull the as you know when you're starting a chapter, or even any part of a story in whatever story you're writing.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if the characters are supposed to be all military. But I th- but there was also a whole lot of showing and not telling when it came to the cast, as well as them trying to do the whole your team is your weapon,
Yeah.
which is a nice concept, and they which is baffling in terms of how it turned out, because they brought in some people who had worked on Republic Commando for the game.
Mm-hmm.
And Republic Commando was actually really good when it came to its squad setup.
Absolutely.
But on the other hand, Republic Commando only had yourself and 2 allies, not a 4-person team.
Exactly.
There's also the fact that if you look at the team in Republic Commando, aside from the fact that that the person you're controlling is always the same, um, the other two have their own approaches to things. Like Sev is always gonna be the heavy weapons,
Yeah.
and when it comes to when it comes when it comes to the concept, the problem is that the only way to really do that sort of that sort of squad based tactical shooter would be to vastly change the sandbox. It's like
Hmm.
you have to maintain the same sandbox as what came before, but you're also trying to do this whole new gameplay style. And the result and trying to compromise between the two results in not pleasing either. So it's but the fact that they spent so much time with that, it's almost a case of tunnel vision. Like how certain designers will focus way too much on one particular mechanic, even though that mechanic may not be as impressive, it somehow is impressive to them to the point where they'll spend months, if not years, on this one idea.
Yeah.
Um, to use a couple other examples, one of them would be procedurally generated planets when it came to Mass Effect Andromeda. They spent months trying to get that to work, even though everybody said that's a bad idea because there's no precedent for it.
Yeah. Well, no, there's one precedent for it, and it was a bad precedent.
What, Star Citizen?
No Man's Sky.
I don't know if that was out yet by the when they were developing.
We can check. Because No Man's Sky was released 2016, so
But if I had to go with another example that actually where this concept actually did make it, it is the use of the Batmobile in Arkham Knight.
hmm.
Because yeah, being able to drive around in the Batmobile is cute and all, but there are way too many missions that focus on vehicular combat, and the vehicular combat is not that interesting.
Or that good.
No, especially when you compare it to the regular on the ground combat or even the Predator missions. You know, the things that there was already 3 games worth of refining over.
Hmm.
But the and I am counting the idea of teamwork in this, especially since the marketing for Halo 5 had this idea of Chief going renegade and being pursued by Locke, and the two of them would be coming to blows.
Yeah, that marketing was super like misleading.
Very much so. The and I do think a lot of people bought on that idea. And yes, Locke and Chief do end up fighting in one of the worst hand-to-hand fights I've ever seen. But but the but that's not what the marketing implied. It implied that that the hero for all these games was going to be going rogue, and the UNSC was sending someone to deal with them. Which is why the line of I'm not so much hunting a Spartan as I am hunting the Spartan is such a crucial line.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be honest. I never actually played that game, but all the marketing says exactly what you were saying. I mean, I thought that that's what was going on in it, and that's why I was kind of like, I'm not interested.
Except that's it. That would be a different direction to go into it. Now, I will note that a big reason why a lot of the same emotional range that was in Halo 4 wasn't in 5 was because the people who made 5 work did not ended up jumping ship to other studios, which is unsurprising when you build that kind of dream team. You've got a bunch of people who aren't going to be all that willing to stick around.
Mm-hmm.
So instead you have you had you a lot of it was done, but a lot of Five's development was done by the team who did the Spartan Ops mode for 4, which was an attempt to try and do a chapter-based story thing when it came to multiplayer. It didn't pan out. And the thing is, they said, if it's successful, we have a story that we can tell for years. Well, it wasn't successful. And somehow they ended up failing upwards. And I think the lack of and Zero saying, I feel from listening to you guys that I'm glad I'm blissfully ignorant to anything that happens in 5. I feel like 343 is trying to scrub 5 as well. But aside, there's also the fact that a lot of conversations happen over radio.
Yeah.
A few too many. It ends up falling into the tropes that a lot of average shooters ended up falling into. And I know some people got really mad about the fact that split screen co-op was dropped in 5. In 4 in 4 split screen co-op was buggy as hell.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing their mindset was we don't have enough time to refine it, so let's just drop it. Some people tried to say that them dropping split screen co-op was a conspiracy to sell more Xboxes. Hanlon's razor applies here.
Yeah.
And when it but the I'd say one of the big thing about bringing Cortana back, and then the whole thing with the Guardians, which that got dropped afterwards real quick. I mean, it'd be fine, but you'd have to go out of your way to explain how Cortana's supposed to be dead, yet all of a sudden she's back.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and it wasn't a case of oh, the 24-hour death. No, she was dying of rampancy.
Yeah, the thing that all AIs are apparently designed to be shut down before.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're all retired at the end of usually 5 years. Otherwise, they start to go rampant.
7 years, because
Oh yeah, 7
because
years.
Bungie still wants to throw in the number 7 to poison my mind.
I mean, number 7's a good number. Not as good as 9, but it's good. But still good.
You look around in, say, Marathon a bit, and you will see a lot of 7s, to the point where you start seeing 7s where they don't exist.
Of course.
He's not wrong on that. God knows how many times I've seen 7 in that game.
I mean, but that's like saying that that in System Shock 2, you see Shodan so much you start seeing Shodan everywhere, even when they're not there.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same idea.
More or less, essentially brain poison.
Yes.
Uh, though oddly enough, for all of the complaints I have with the single player, the multiplayer, I'd say was the one case where they were starting to get the whole fourth pillar right by having that fourth pillar be solely focused on mobility.
Hmm.
To the point where it's the use of it actually feels like it belongs there instead of it being shoehorned in.
Hmm.
Though I do think I do th- though if I'm being honest, I wasn't a big fan of the map design with Halo 5's multiplayer. The big reason for it is that a lot of the maps felt very samey, and I think it has something to do with the fact that they hired a bunch of pros to help with development. A neat idea in concept, but the problem is you can end up getting tunnel vision where you're focused solely on the competitive viability aspect, which is the 1% of the 1%. You know, it's kind of like expecting people to play the MLG variants of say 3 or Reach.
Hmm.
And yes, there was also Warzone, which introduced the MTX bullshit. Uh, but even beyond the microtransaction problem, the big problem that I ended up having with it was the fact that the requisitions can easily turn against you.
Hmm.
Is the idea is you use it and then you get a supply drop with that thing. Well, supply drops can be shot at.
Yes, they can.
So if somebody knows that a supply drop is coming, they could shoot it down and then you don't get that thing and you don't get any takebacks. And of course, Warzone. I think the bigger reason why Warzone got hate is because it was replacing big team battle,
Hmm.
and BTB will always be a staple.
Yep.
But I'd like to, you and I remember when development of Infinity became a thing, we were flying the flag hard for it.
We. I don't know if we were flying the flag hard. I know that we were talking about how there are things they could do to make sure it's successful, and also things we were cautiously optimistic about.
Hmm. We were definitely more optimistic about Infinite than we were with 5. I know a lot of people did not like the open world aspect, but I didn't mind it because well, Halo's already has leaned into that with a lot of the open areas throughout the series.
Hmm.
But as if there was anything that held the campaign when it came to Infinite back, it was probably the way the story is told. Like you could do a drinking game out of the number of times that they do the shot of somebody talking while there's a rotating camera, a la the rotating camera trick that Michael Bay abuses.
Hmm.
Like once you've seen that particular pattern, you can't unsee it. It doesn't exactly help that the leader of the Banished just does nothing but taunt you throughout the campaign, and you can't really do a whole lot back. So by the time you end up fighting him, it doesn't feel satisfying.
Hmm.
But although I will say, I absolutely loved the use of the grappling hook. Like we
The
need
grappling hook was super useful within the game.
like we need more grappling hooks in games.
Absolutely.
But I think but when it comes to Infinite, if you guys had to guess, why do you think it wasn't able to keep the momentum that it had really early on?
Um, I think a lot of it was broken promises, especially of things that people were really looking forward to getting back. Campaign co-op being one of them.
Yeah,
Yeah, that definitely played a big factor.
I would say one thing that played an even bigger factor is Forge.
Yeah,
Yeah, the ability to create your own maps and stuff, that is just honestly giving those tools to players is probably the best thing a game can do because it gives it more longevity. Same thing with mods.
Yeah. 5 didn't have Forge at launch, but it would later get it along with some pretty decent additions. But unless I'm mistaken, Forge is still supposedly being worked on when it comes to Infinite.
supposedly being the keyword there.
And instead of working on that, they keep putting in these roadmap things, and something else that certainly didn't help was jumping on the battle pass concept.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to use some expletives right now.
This is the fucking monastery. Are you kidding?
Oh, no, no. I would like to take everyone who thinks that battle passes and microtransactions as a good idea and introduce them to a very sharp object up their anus.
So you want to fuck them with shards of glass? Got it.
Actually, I was thinking a needler.
I mean, it's like shooting shards of exploding glass up their ass.
Yeah, that works. Let's do it.
Uh, you both of you have seen Little Nicky, right?
Yep. Pineapple with Hitler.
Actually, no, I have not seen that movie. I'm not an Adam Sandler fan. I know, blasphemy.
I never said that.
Yeah, no one said it was bad.
I just, but as far as expletives go, Neff, that was tame by monastery standards.
Yeah, we get pretty fucking gross around here sometimes.
But the I can certainly see the broken promises thing, especially since the the vibe that Infinite had up until release felt like they were dipping into stuff from the past, including trying to throw back to earlier art styles, especially when it came to the design of the chief. Because you look at the design of him in 4 and 5, and it's very over designed. The kind of over design that I keep railing on, when it comes to superhero outfits in cape shit movies.
Mm-hmm.
No, just way too many little details all over the place. But 343, since they took the helm, have been dealing with an identity crisis issue, where they seem to be looking backwards instead of looking forwards. And in your guys' opinion, why do you think 343 um, hasn't been able to carry on the mantle as well as they probably should?
That's a hard one. I think part of it has to do with no longer being part of Bungie has a clear vision of the things they want to do.
It may not be good, but they have it.
Well, I mean, you can't even say whether it's good or bad all the time as well, because the stuff that they've been trying to do with Destiny hasn't always been executed well, and it's not usually like some of. Let's be honest. A lot of that is Activision Blizzard's fault.
Yeah, that is true.
And there's been a lot less of that bullshit since they were able to get free from Activision Blizzard.
Exactly. Things have been improving. But Bungie tends to have like an actual a focus, I guess is the best thing. They want to they have an idea they want to pursue and follow and build around. Whereas a lot of what 343 is doing is just trying to continue Halo. And while that's a goal, I don't think that's the same thing that was happening when Bungie was continuing Halo. Continuing Halo was served by a new core idea each time. And so they had a focus that had a sub goal of continuing Halo. Beyond that, I think it's also the fact that 343 Studios is missing some of the key members that were integral to how Halo felt.
Even well, as I mentioned before, a lot of the people who worked on Halo 4 did not stick around. Some of them formed the studio Camouflage, spelled with a J. Some of them moved over to other studios, and some of them just went independent.
Yeah, and all of that is not only did 343 when it was starting out not have all of the core members that were intrinsic to how Halo felt, but then they bled a bunch more members away after 4, and I'm sure they got new talent in regardless, but it isn't going to be the same. With Infinity, the thing that they really failed at was all the broken promises. A lot of Infinity, both the campaign and the online, feel Halo. It feels like you're playing Halo. But there are so many things that were also supposed to be in there that are not. That are things that a lot of people think of as core concepts to Halo. That without them present, you're just going to get people saying this is just a cash grab. And especially with some of the more predatory monetization options that they've put in.
Yeah, there wasn't microtransaction when it in a roundabout way. I will argue that that microtransactions are just as bad, if not worse, than battle passes. But they are bad in different ways. MTX is bad because of the gambler issue, obviously. But
well, it depends on what type of MTX you have. Mm-hmm. They're using another game that technically has MTX and battle passes. Doom Eternal. It has a battle pass, technically. It also has some MTX, technically. But you know what you're buying, period. There's nothing there that is a random loot box beyond one box you open has 7 different things you can get from it, but once you've got one thing, it won't appear in the next box you open. So you're just collecting. Once you have 7 of those boxes, you have all of the things, basically. And that's the most randomization that I saw when I was playing Eternal.
Or hell, you could go with the battle passes in something like Conan Exiles, where you know exactly what you're getting at what stage of what, and you see it right in front of you before you even decide if you want to do it.
The issue that can come from battle passes when poorly implemented is when it begins to feel like busy work. This is the reason why I will rant on, say, dailies in WoW and other games.
I can understand that. And there's a bigger issue there. The biggest issue with any sort of monetization scheme is if the monetization scheme actively gives you in-game mechanical advantages that you cannot get without paying for them, otherwise known as pay to win. I don't think Halo Infinite did that, which is a good job doing the bare minimum.
No, it didn't do pay to win, but there was the busy work issue with the battle pass.
Yes, absolutely. And when you combine the two, it gets even worse. Like with Diablo Immortal.
Mm-hmm.
Do we talk about pay to win game, the video game? I don't think we should. I don't think we need to mention much more.
No, I think that's a pretty good indication of it.
Yeah. I think that if 343 is going to pull themselves out of the slump, the first thing they need to do is maybe design a different game. Design a different game. Don't do a Halo. Design something that you can you make the goal for it. You're not trying to just continue Halo. You're actually and actively creating a goal to go towards to create a new IP, even if it's just one game.
And honestly, one thing you mentioned before, which they really need to take to heart, is a series Bible. They need to actually sit down and say, okay, what things are we going to make sure we do? What things are we going to make sure we don't do? How are we going to implement it? And then set that vision before they even start coming up with any ideas.
Yeah. But I honestly think they need to take a break from Halo. That's the big one for me.
Yeah, they could do well just trying a completely different genre of game, too. Just take a break from it mentally.
Mm-hmm. And once they've had that time to reset and revitalize doing something else creative that doesn't have the pressure of the word Halo on it, because I think there's probably a small misconception in the team that they need to meet some sort of pedigree.
Well, it is funny you mention that because I remember I know I keep picking on 4, but I look at 4 as kind of the patient zero for a lot of the issues.
Yep.
Oh, they had said that they wanted to approach things from a different approach than what Bungie did. And one of the big things was rebuilding the sound library from scratch, which certainly helps with the sound design for allowing as well as the pace allowing for a more aggressive style, which is certainly a good response to the fact that 3 and Reach had kind of slowed things down a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, but in the process of doing this, you have that mindset of we need to continue Halo, but we need to do things differently than what Bungie did. We don't want to just copy what they did in the past. When you end up doing that, you end up having a situation where you're doing things not because they're a smart move for the game you're designing, but just to be different for its own sake.
Yeah, it's the reverse side of the coin that we always say we hate. Designed by gospel. This would be anti-design by gospel.
Designed by heresy?
Contra-design. There's a better word. Contra-design. You're designing in contrary to the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
And
don't get me wrong. We love the idea of someone designing something that they want to do, even if it's contrary to the gospel. But if I'm reading this right, what you're referring to as contra design is when you're designing it to be different from the gospel, and that's the full stop of it.
Yes. So ultimately, it is still by gospel, but instead of following the gospel, you are doing everything you can to avoid the gospel, period. End of story. Mm-hmm. And we both forms of this are dogmatic, and dogmatic design is the issue that we have. Design your game in the way that best suits your game. Mm-hmm. That is what we have always encouraged. Whether that's taking elements from what has come before, or using new elements, or making an element completely contrary to what has come before. So long as those elements serve the game you're making, that's usually the best step to take. Admittedly, there are times where you may have to compromise or change things because it doesn't mesh well with the rest of the game, but those are details that we've talked about on numerous other Geek Watches that are all considerations. This is a baseline maxim that you obviously adjust. It's a generalism, and remember, specificities beat general. So, but with that, they design a new game, whatever it might be, then they come back to Halo, and the next thing they need to decide is not so Tired of Life mentions if they actually made a game other than Halo, even if it was take a mental break from the franchise, then the general population would also benefit. It's like movies or TV, games also need fresh meat. Absolutely.
To that end, what would you say to what if they had done say a spin-off, much like how ODST was a spin-off?
I think the issue there is the Halo name is still going to be on it. And there's still going to be a sense of expectations internally and externally. Getting away from the Halo name entirely was what I was suggesting. A new IP. Maybe even a new genre, like not just a new genre, like not FPS, but like a new genre, like not the same setting type thing. Maybe you make it, I don't know, an adventure game that takes place entirely underground. I can't think of something more opposite of Halo than that.
You just want Dwarf Fortress in shooter form.
No, not in shooter form, in adventure form, damn it. But yes, Dwarf Fortress in adventure form would be lovely. But you do something completely different from what you're used to. It gives you a palate cleanse, it gives you a brain reset. You come back to Halo, and like I said, the big thing they need to do is decide on a core idea to go after, regardless of whether it's actually continuing Halo. Then they could come back, and maybe they don't make another mainline Halo. Maybe at that point they do make a spin-off. But it's still Halo, and they want to do it because they have a cool idea for a spin-off for Halo, and that's what they do.
Yeah.
Maybe we finally get StarCraft Ghost, but in Halo form. I don't know.
Oh, they could go completely opposite in terms of gameplay and do something like Tectonica, underground factory building game.
Once again, we are all appealing to dwarves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the point is that 343 needs a break from making Halo, because it is very clear that the expectations, both internally and externally, regarding the pedigree and the name, are fucking with them.
I can't help but wonder if them putting a lot more focus on the Master Chief Collection is them trying to give themselves a break.
It could be
moving the Master Chief Collection over to PC and working on opening up modding tools for it.
It could be.
But he's right, though. They need a palate cleanser. They need to get something else under their belt first. Not only will it help them just de-stress, but it may also help them get used to each other, find common ground with their fellow employees and just do some team building.
Well, that was something that I brought up beforehand when it came to the assembly of 343 Industries. It was it wasn't a team. It was a team in the same way that say super teams are in sports. Essentially the 93 All-Star team that Dan Snyder tried to put together when he took hold of the Washington Redskins. And that team ended up failing. Or the quote-unquote dream team that was hyped all to hell with the Philadelphia Eagles that didn't even make the playoffs. it's hard for me to come up with an idea with a similar dream team idea when it comes to hockey, because hockey, the way it works doesn't really support the idea. You can't
Mm.
really build a super team in hockey. I know some people
Yeah.
say, wouldn't the Golden Knights count? No, not really. the the Golden Knights in their first year just happened to have a 95 carat horseshoe stuck up their ass. I know that a lot of people, especially Leafs fans, like to claim that they were given some sort of advantage when it came to the expansion draft, but no. In fact, everybody at the time was saying their expansion draft looked horrible, and the only decent player in that expansion draft was Marc-Andre Fleury.
Yeah, but when it comes to Leafs fans, they'll claim anything to try and excuse their own failures.
Yeah, we have the wheel of excuses for a reason, and that got brought out when it came to the whole thing. As soon as they got eliminated, I immediately heard from Leafs fans, "Oh, we got screwed over by the refs." I'm like, the refs screw over everybody in playoff hockey. That's how this works. You're not special. But the point is that whenever it's a lot of people seem to have this idea that especially when it comes to sports and to an extent with game design, that you can just throw more money at a problem and it'll solve itself. More often than not, that just makes the problem worse. And
Yeah, you get design creep, which, well, Duke Nukem forever.
Feature creep is such a good thing, guys. I swear.
I know that's the big whipping boy when it comes to design creep, but I'd say the bigger whipping boy these days for design creep is Star Citizen.
Good point.
Not just in scale, obviously, but also in the fact that Roberts wants to try and make his dream game. Except, well,
Although I will give him credit on one thing. He actually does have a playable game, unlike Yandere Dev.
that's a whole other kettle of fish that I do not want to get into. I am not drunk enough for that.
Let's not. Let's not and say we didn't.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, what I can say about these two separate paths that Halo has taken over the years is that the lack of focus seems to be the biggest stumbling block. And in order to regain that focus with 343 Studios, they absolutely need time. And that's going to be the biggest issue, especially since Microsoft is not known for giving any of their workers a lot of time to do anything. And since 343 is under stewardship of Microsoft, well, I don't know.
I think that's why it's an interesting contrast to look at that and look at how Bungie has handled Destiny.
Mm-hmm.
Now, yes, the first Destiny was a stumbling point, and there was a lot of development hell. I'm not going to deny that. 2 was certainly was better narrative. 2 was better narratively, and I'd say by the time the Taken King expansion for the original Destiny had come out, they were starting to find their footing. Then of course with 3 there was the infamous MTX problem that ended up happening,
Mm-hmm.
as well as some things getting a bit grindy. But they've since solved it, and while getting into Destiny 2 nowadays is going to be a bit messy, and there's going to be a whole lot of info that has to be caught up on. It's in a much better place since they decided to go full independent. and even with that shaky ground, a lot of the DNA that Bungie established is still there, and hell, it's clear that they still think about Marathon because the Mida multi tool show made a cameo in Destiny.
I love that gun.
And in addition, there was a bit there because of the way the blurb for that thing was written in Destiny. There could be the implication that Destiny and Marathon take place in the same universe. That's obviously not the case, but let's not forget that Marathon Infinity had you jump through like 6 or 7 different timelines.
Let's not forget that there's a bunch of bullshit in Marathon Infinity either.
I get a feeling that with Infinity there was some copious mushroom usage.
Well, Bungie didn't technically develop Marathon Infinity,
Marathon and Infinity, yeah.
but it's one of those looking glass kind of situations because it was developed by a studio called Double Ought. But Double Ought was founded by a bunch of ex-Bungie staff. So
I kind of wonder if Double Ought had borrowed Keltec's cocaine train.
possibly.
No one who gets that joke, you don't know enough about guns. That's all.
Oh, I get it. I've certainly watched enough of Brendan Herrera stuff to know that one.
Keltec guns look weird, but they're sure as fuck cool as well.
And I'm actually kind of disappointed that a lot of Keltec's guns haven't shown up in sci-fi movies.
They totally fit, especially things like the the K90 or the K50, which is the P50, which is like a P90 except it's a pistol.
Oh,
That thing
God,
is
yes.
that thing looks like a fucking sci-fi gun and should totally be in a fucking movie.
Yeah, just a little paint job on it and maybe a few LEDs and the damn thing would look like a laser pistol, no problem.
I think that's a little rails for us at this point.
You know, actually, come to think of it, taking it back to the main train, I wonder if Caltech may have actually gotten some of their ideas from some of the stuff in Halo and Marathon. Some of their designs look very sci-fi.
I think it's a chicken and egg situation in that case, but to kind of illustrate what I mean about them still thinking of Marathon, I'd like to read the lore entry from the Mida mini tool. I'm quoting from the wiki on this. 2472 1117 4.9S 0E audio only. Strauss is gone. Whole sky went alight as the ship set off. I might be the last Mida survivor on Mars. The gun detected teleports yesterday and I had to move camp. Cannot shake the fear that they will send battleroids. Even this AI marvel couldn't save me. Shot the ice this morning. The gun fired a thermal round and then a pellet of water purifier. Came out pure and sweet. Marvelous. I've been reading the gun's Encyclopedia Arcana. All about the crash that became Strauss's obsession and hope. Metastability in the salvage construct. Ha ha. Let's hope our ideals can too pass through grief, fury, and envy into a new freedom elsewhere. Wonder if the gun heard me when I asked to go somewhere better. Wonder why it led me here. Going to follow its compass tonight. Down below.
Yeah, and metastability is a concept that was very much in the Marathon series. It was the quote unquote holy grail of a rampant AI actually finding peace.
And
Interesting.
incidentally, there's some allusions that can be. Let's also not forget that a lot of the names of the AIs in Marathon, the ones that went rampant, have some allusions to the Song of Roland.
Yeah, well, heck, one of them was literally the Sword of Roland.
Yeah, and one of the other swords and one of the great treasures of England, Cortana.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious that Bungie themselves have their own inspirations that they keep drawing from.
There's also the fact that and it, the reason why I bring up that kind of thing is that sort of sense of inspiration. I'm not quite sure was within a lot of the material with 343, because if you had that sense of inspiration, then you wouldn't have had the amount of redesigns that happened with the Promethean Knight. Like consider how let's look at how each of the enemy factions in Destiny have very clear points of origin and points of inspiration. The Hive, for instance, all of the enemy types with the Hive are named after are named after essentially knightly titles. They're essentially meant. The idea is them being undead knights, and the higher ups being undead kings.
Hmm.
I mean, as far as how undead they are, that's up for debate. But they certainly love using swarm tactics. And you have other motifs when it comes to things like when it comes to the other enemy types throughout Destiny. Whereas the contrast that with what the visual motif is supposed to be for, say, the Forerunners. I mean, the closest that you can come to is hard light technology and apparently a fixation on these heavily designed things that are, I guess, supposed to give the implication of them being angels,
Hmm.
which I guess would fit given the religious nature of the Covenant. But if that's the case, why does the Covenant have such a boner for purple? You know, if they're building their tech out of based on Forerunner artifacts, you would think that they would try and keep the same color motif as well. The the issue that I'm getting at is 343 has spent so much of its time looking backwards.
Hmm. Again, like I said, that's where I feel they get that pressure of pedigree. They're trying so hard to continue what came before that they aren't focused on just making a really good game.
And hey, the I won't say decline, but as time went on, when it came to Bungie's run with Halo, they were more satisfying their fans instead of setting a new bar. Which, to be fair, it's hard to keep setting a new bar year after year. And of course the other thing that certainly doesn't help matters when it comes to 343 is not having O'Donnell and Salvatore. I mean, Neil Davidge and Kazuma Junichi did really good work in 4, but Neil Davidge didn't stick around, and Kazuma Junichi was left to fend for himself. And the problem with that is, well, the best track in 5 was the Trials, which is a remix of the Halo theme. Once
Mhm.
again, looking backwards, the bigger problem was 5 abused strings a lot. And don't get me wrong, I love strings as much as the next guy, but the use of the strings and noticing the pattern kind of took me out of it. It's a if you're going to be using strings a lot, then I think using a variety of strings or a variety of melodies is important.
Strings. Strings are such a versatile instrument too.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a lot that can be done with strings, but yeah, the grandiosity that strings can bring to something are absolutely imperative for something like uh, well, I think like basically anything Bungie or 343 has done.
I could certainly see it, and I think as long as they keep looking backwards, they're going to end up overcompensating because
Mm-hmm.
because when I look at the gameplay styles that we saw in Infinite, I didn't see a whole I didn't see a whole lot new. I saw a whole lot of hey, remember how fun Slayer was back in the day?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and this is one particular reason why one thing that I will advocate for until someone forces me to stop is being able to create custom playlists. When the kind of thing that fucking Smash has been able to figure out for years.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
And
most go ahead.
we had some customization in Halo as well. I mean, I remember my friends and I, and I'm probably everybody's friend. I'm sure everybody's friends eventually came up with this game type at one point. But taking Juggernaut and making it complete bullshit for the rest of the team by giving the Juggernaut like quad overshields and triple speed and everything.
Mm-hmm.
No, I remember we called that game Dreadnought. And the reason it was complete bullshit is because of the fact that you could fucking snipe the Juggernaut multiple times, and because everything was sped up and shit, the Juggernaut would just not go down.
Mm-hmm.
You had to really like plan stuff. I remember one time they picked up a tank and just ran him over, and it still didn't kill him.
Well, to be fair, you design bullshit, and bullshit is what you're gonna get. But I would say most of the people who are playing multiplayer when it comes to Halo these days are playing custom games.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where you can get away with glorious stupidity. But I wouldn't I I wouldn't be surprised if the break that ends up happening is a bunch of people getting churned out and going to other studios. You know, and then Microsoft thinking, okay, we'll bring in a bunch of new people to continue the franchise. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, keep in mind this is the same company that tried to make Halo into an MMO until cooler heads prevailed.
You know, hold on a second. Is there a way to design a cool Halo MMO?
Are we talking sandbox or theme park?
Theme park MMO. I don't think a sandbox would be as effective with Halo.
Do you remember the Jedi problem that I talked about years ago when it came to Star Wars Galaxies?
Yeah, so you don't have Spartans as a playable class.
Yeah, we saw how well that turned out with Star Wars Galaxies and Jedi.
Well, no. You see, here's the thing: if you're playing Halo, there's only one Spartan left. Not everybody can be John, so he's a hero character.
If someone had tasked me with making a Halo MMO, the approach that I would probably end up taking
Mm-hmm.
is choose one of the installations that hasn't been blown up, and have it where you have UNSC, Covenant, and Sentinels on that particular installation trying to wrestle control of it.
Absolutely. You could definitely make an MMO where it's over control of a ring that really hasn't seen Master Chief's destructive wake.
Oh, you can even do an RTS with that.
That's already
They
been
did an RTS that's called Halo Wars.
yeah, which is why I didn't put that in. And truth be told, the idea of doing it, the key thing, and I'd say if I'm gonna use a template, I would use a more survival type MMO, not in terms of crafting and all that, but in terms of going out into the wilderness to scout. Is the original Halo had plans for different types of wildlife within it, and the big reason why I put the Sentinels in the mix when it comes to this battle for control over it is Sentinels are meant to be a kind of neutral force, a force that's meant to screw over both sides.
Mm-hmm.
If one side starts getting a little bit too big for their britches, then Sentinels start coming in.
Mm-hmm.
If say the Covenant ends up getting too much control, then Sentinels are going to start attacking, and they now have to fight a two-front war. That's obviously that is heavily simplified, but that's the approach can be done. Apparently, there was also some David Cage led project called Halo Chronicles that was also in the works. Although that may have been a mercy killing because you don't want because I would not trust David Cage with trying to do a Halo story. These days, I wouldn't trust David Cage with a stick as far as I can throw him in terms of his writing. Because we like dogs. He doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
How could
I like dogs. Brian DeChart, everybody.
how could I not bring that up? But overall, if to bring it back to the running a marathon gag, um, I'd say 343 is the equivalent of running a marathon as done by Sisyphus.
Ouch. That's cold.
Am I wrong though?
Mm-hmm.
No, but it's still cold.
As long as they keep looking back to try and satisfy um the past instead of adding to it, they're going to be in this kind of situation. But if at the very least, stop trying to make promises if you can't keep. But that I think is going to cover it for this particular episode. This was an interesting one to delve into. Uh, and we will be back next week with something a little different. But also, tune in tomorrow because we'll be doing the recording for the Parliament of Geeks covering Vox Machina Season 2.
Aye, aye.
And if things go the way I think they will, I'm going to be doing 2 interviews with 2 different Italian devs this week. As well as a guy who wants to take the mystery flesh pit concept and turn it into an RPG using the Cipher system. Now, Tired of Life brings up, are VR headsets still really popular? Because I keep thinking of 343 releasing an absolute meme of a game, the original Pong game, but the player sees it from the POV of the ball flying back and forth. You want to give people massive headaches with VR because that's how you do it.
Yeah. As someone who actually deals with VR on a daily basis, absolutely.
No, here's the meme, Monk. You want to make a vomit comet? Because that's how you make a vomit comet.
Yeah. we already have the vomit comet as a plane for shooting 0G.
Yep.
And honestly, if you're going to do a Pong game, do the variant in VR like I used to see, which was Mortal Kombat. They took fatalities and fighting styles from Mortal Kombat and gave them to the paddles.
But if you wanted to really embrace the meme, don't call it Pong, call it Gnop.
That hurts. That really hurts. Why would you say such a thing, Monk? Why?
Blame Bungie. They're the ones who made a Pong ripoff called Nop.
I know.
Of course, that lives rent-free in Mandalore's head because he called it just a funny little ball traveling around, then called back to it with the Traveler from Destiny. But again, there's going to be some fun stuff coming in the next few days with the monastery, so please look forward to it. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra, I am your gaming monk, and join the watch.